If there's anything I've learned for the last 4 years, it's just like expect nothing, like this whole thing with like CNN and Shark Tank and this, like beyond my wildest dreams. Like, let me just say, so grateful for those crazy opportunities. The long-term vision is become the nest for gardening and houseplants. Become basically this company that merges IoT and everything we've done with the merging of hardware and software to make it as easy and fun as possible for people to become plant parents.
Welcome to the Hardtech Podcast.
And everybody, welcome back to the Hardtech Podcast. I'm your host, DeAndre Harakas, with my co-host, Grant Chapman.
Hey, everybody.
And we're super excited today. We have a guest with Aabesh Day from Flora. And he starts off as a plant serial killer. So that's how I'm going to intro him. Aabesh, super good to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's really good to be here. Recovering serial plant killer is the official title nowadays. If there's something I have to show for Flora, it's at least that, I'm trying my best to kind of recover. And so that is literally how it started 4 years ago. I was a serial plant killer, killing every single plant in my line of sight. And I feel like tens of millions of Americans will resonate deeply with that feeling. It was my dear mother's prized rosebush plant that she had for years that she ended up gifting me. And I killed that thing in like under 2 weeks, but basically a little bit over a week. Record time, right? Record disappointment on, my Indian mother's face. And so that kind of spurred me into thinking like, okay, what can I do to solve this problem for myself, right? I think there's dozens of plant care apps and guides and websites and different things I can buy and all this. And it just felt frustrating, fragmented. I was looking for something as a geek at heart, something kind of like an IoT product, like a Nest for plants that I could just plug and play, get real-time physical feedback. And the more I looked, the more disappointment I found in finding the same kind of copied and pasted dropship products across Amazon, Walmart, online. I was really, really surprised to find that there wasn't something like a Nest for plants that had really broken through yet. And that kind of started, the entrepreneurial fire of there's something here. There's got to be something here because I'm not the only one that's killing plants. Even people that have, green thumbs still have the issue of killing different plant species. And
I murder plenty of plants in my garden. My wife and I are experts at murdering things and not knowing how or why.
So you mentioned, gardening is a great example where it's, the more you get into it, I feel like there's a direct correlation of getting more into houseplants and gardening and the number of plants you kill, period. Like, I think the more you get into it, the more you kill.
Your percentage of plants killed may go down, and more of them survive, but the total number of plants killed just goes to the moon.
Oh, yeah. It's an absolute increase. And so that was what I was trying to solve for myself. And the real moment was when I realized I was getting into DIY hardware, so Arduino kits and, little robotics projects and sensor boards. And I ended up basically taking time out of COVID while working at Microsoft to create this prototype that would basically light up blue or green depending on the plant's mood and moisture. So I realized that was kind of the starting point. And then I added to it. I eventually added like a little water tank and reservoir that would automatically water the plant, while I was away. And I realized that there was a lot of fun. One, I was having a ton of fun with this, right? This is one of those things where I was like, I'm not treating it as a business. I'm treating this as if I can solve this for myself and my wife, Anna, and then maybe my mom, and then maybe a few other folks, maybe this could lead to something, And it wasn't until I actually developed the beta version of the app where I realized, okay, there's something real here. I realized that there was we were actually talking about this before, right? The disconnect between hardware and software is a very real thing, right? You could have the world's best hardware in the sense of, it looks sleek, it functions out of the box, but there is a certain type of disconnect and certain disappointment in, when you realize you try to connect something that's like an IoT product and the first step out of the box, like the Wi-Fi doesn't work or the Bluetooth doesn't work or the UX UI is horrendous and like the app doesn't make any sense. And
you can't find that one setting that you care about, even though it's not obvious that that's a key feature of the device, but you knew it's there. You just can't find it, right? How do I change this timer? How do I change that alert setting?
Yep, exactly.
Right? That whole UX, everyone's opinion of a product is the weakest link in the chain that they've experienced in that product every time, right? This product is great because the worst part about it is it's still great. Or, man, this product sucks. X, Y, and Z are excellent, except I can't stand their blank. Right.
Exactly. And that product-centric approach, coming at it from the pain point versus wouldn't this be cool, is sort of what got me into this in the first place, right? I realized that it was such a frustrating experience having all of these different sensors that I was trying to use, and all of these apps were just garbage, right? And that's why I think the next step for us was solving that hardware-software disconnect in kind of following the Apple methodology of great hardware is married closely to great software and UX and UI, right? And so that's why I developed the Flora app from scratch. It was Swift native, and I wanted it to be as gamified and easy to use as possible. That was the goal, is that I don't want to treat this as a business just yet, but if I do, I want it to be the case that we figure out the app first, and then the hardware is kind of this nice kind of cherry on top, even though that's really the crux of how we got onto Shark Tank and did all these amazing things. Like, I knew that the app had to be the heartbeat of the entire ecosystem, and it had to have a strong heart to do so, right? And so that's what we focused on from the start, and I think that really has been one of our strongest differentiators now against all the other competition, is that we have such a great app and user experience that go along with it, that makes us stand out from the crowd, and honestly makes all the hardware stuff so much easier, because we can at least rest easy knowing that, all right, we did a good job on the software, on the UX, UI. It just makes everything kind of fall into line a little bit more easily. Yeah.
You know, a question I have for you, Aabesh, is more like practical. As you were making that decision with aligning the software with the hardware and like that decision matrix around like what actually made it user centric, like what was your process there in terms of like, because I think it's one thing to make a product user centric purely on the software side, but you also have this hardware component as well, and like how did you marry those two together?
The hardware took a while. That's the big thing that I think a lot of I tell a lot of hardware founders or hardware founders to be, the iteration cycle for software is literally me being pissed off about like a feature, coding and like losing myself in a rabbit hole until like 3 a.m. looking at Xcode logs, and then the next morning there's a release, right? With hardware, it's, if you mess this up, 3-4 months will fly by, and suddenly you've wasted tens of thousands of dollars, and you're looking at something that could have been totally different in terms of a path, in terms of, just the cascading ripple effect of losing that time. So an iteration cycle in hardware is so much longer. So you have to get the product experience right in terms of, putting kind of feedback into the loop as much as possible, right? With software, it was easy. It came naturally in the sense of, hey, I'm developing this app for myself. I'm testing it ruthlessly so that there's a very strict kind of filter of like, hey, if I'm not using this, there's no way I expect anyone else to, right? So it has to kind of go through my screening of standards. And that, I think, is really what helped us early on, was that I was so close to the product and so close to feeling the customer's pain points in that case. It wasn't just like me outsourcing things to like another agency, to another product manager, to another person. It was pretty much me seeing feedback come in saying, hey, this doesn't work, hey, this is crashing, and me realizing, whoa, I don't want that experience, right? With hardware, it was the opposite. It was what I mentioned in working with an agency and working with third parties and working with multiple third parties working together and creating those systems and processes to essentially and hopefully reduce the amount of risk and reduce the time it took to kind of iterate on the product. So software, we kind of figured out pretty easily because we were very close to the feedback loop, and I was very close to the feedback loop.
And you're the developer originally, so you're a software native, right?
Right.
You're the detective, the victim, and the judge all at the same time.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You experienced the bug crash. You got murdered. You're the one who actually murdered it because you were the one that wrote the code. You wrote the code that made the bug crash. But you're the judge that had to go investigate and find out what happened.
Exactly.
So it's this, this whole thing, wrapped into one that I love that pitch. And where you jumped into hardware, you are the secondary or third party. You know what you want it to do, you think, but you're relying on another party to translate your English to English translation into hardware version of that description. and then make that a reality and translate that language into atoms.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, unlike compiling code, which you can do at 3 a.m. and by 6 a.m. push it out to all your users, man, making atoms, even the first version to try those new changes, isn't always overnight. Now with 3D printing and even now modern circuit board manufacturing, we can get boards in like 48 hours here at Glassboard.
Right.
It's absolutely bonkers if you want to hit the accelerator button. But those are still days, not minutes or hours.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And then when you want to bring those changes to market, it's weeks, not days.
That's exactly it. Like one example, a great example came from our recent batch in exactly that, where, we could easily spin up like a prototype of like a working change to like our plastics, or a working change to something we
your
tinker
circuit
with
board
around
or your battery.
exactly, like a USB cap or whatever. And we might have something within a week to then say, okay, we have a strong feeling about moving forward with this. But then you're talking about, okay, how do you apply that to actual production tooling and the changes to tooling, and then how do you apply that to quality assurance and quality check, to where your thresholds and your actual experience is going to change dramatically when you scale that to 100 units, 1,000 units, 2,000 units, right? And a good example of that was when our production line recently encountered just an issue out of nowhere of, oh shoot, it looks like this fractional 1 millimeter change in the tooling resulted in the USB cap not properly closing for hundreds of units, right? Or I think it was a fraction, like our QA guys like caught it, pre-production, mid-production and all that. And we were able to fix it with like
But you had to scrap 10 or 20% scrap rate versus 1 or 2% scrap rate all of a sudden.
That's the thing. We definitely had scrap, and we were able to catch it early. But like, that is a great example of, there's no way we could have even anticipated that, despite, you have certain risks and certain factors of like, okay, we should anticipate there might be some stuff that goes wrong here because we've kind of faced that, before. But I think with production, so much of it is just like, planning, despite knowing that you're going to get punched in the face, right? I think that's 100%. Just the name of the game.
We always joke that in hard tech, no plan survives first contact.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Now, good plans help you avoid a lot of other problems you would have ran into, but it is just something always comes up in the atoms world. You can't just compile around overnight. And I think that's, I'd love to dig into this topic that you guys, you've played this game before, right? You've now done it probably less good the first time, really decent now, and great here in the future of your quality control and your process, and learning how to translate a learning in the product into a design change, into a prototype, into I verified that I actually want to do this, into a tooling change, into a verifying that the production part now meets your needs, into how do we catch the quality bugs that we've now introduced. Because every time you change something, you just get different bugs. You never squash all the quality bugs. Quality is there to catch the percent that fall out of bounds that you want to sell, and you throw them away. And the goal is to have quality that you're only throwing away 0.01%. No one ever hits that, but let's pretend that you can hit that. You accept 0.5%. And when you start getting into that, high single digit or low double digit percentages of scrap, now we have to fix this problem, right? And there's this continuum. At what point did you feel like you were completely driving blind here? And at what point did you finally feel like, no, I'm holding the steering wheel. This feels good.
It's a great question. I think the first time we were flying blind was probably the first prototype we had that, like, just when I tell the story, it still feels like I need to figure out more details around it, because it basically was our prototype getting confiscated by the federales in Mexico. And now in our latest batch, I feel like we're finally steering kind of in control, right? And that's a whole different story, and having to deal with alternative supply chains and working with our suppliers through all the tariff fiasco. I think flying through this storm that was tariffs made me feel the most confident ever before in our supply chain, despite our supply chain being at most risk in terms of being
the most upside down it's ever been.
Exactly. I think I'd be freaking out 2-3 years ago, and when we were kind of in the midst of these first runs in our journey. So the prototyping of our first official Flora pod. So we had 3D printed. We were working with this really great startup agency, IDW, out of Merida, Mexico. And we chose them because they were willing to be flexible on payments, on pricing. I was still paying everything out of pocket at that point, funding everything out of my 401k, out of my savings, like all that. We were still kind of striving for investment. This prototype was a big deal because this was our chance to actually show investors, like, look, we know this thing is big and ugly, but like the shows that like we made progress and that we're so close to actually that next stage where you're getting to design for manufacturing, getting to a point where you can actually lock in a design and come up with produced units at the other end, right? Well, lo and behold, I get a call like late night one night from Maurizio, our head guy, or head, prototyping guy.
Yeah, your contact,
and yeah. We've been waiting weeks at this point for this big, beautiful prototype in the sense of like a Trump prototype, if you will, in the sense of waiting for it and building this and spending all this time and money on it. And he sits me down and he goes, hey, we're dealing with some customs issues. You might want to sit down for this. And I was like, okay, this was a risk factor. Like, I'm not familiar with like, Mexican agent customs and all that stuff.
Is it going to delay it by, 72
right.
to
That's exactly
96
what
hours?
I'm
No
thinking.
big deal. Who cares?
Yeah. I'm like, is this a week delay? Is this like this? And he's like, no, this is an existential risk. Like, we might lose the prototype overall. I'm like, whoa, hold up. What? And he goes, it's not just at the hands of a customs agent being held, like the federales are holding it. I'm like, why would the FBI of Mexico be holding like our prototype? And he's like, well, I don't know how to say this, but your package was basically intercepted as part of like a drug cartel pickup. Like it had residue on it with like actual like a cocaine powder from like another box that was in the same
like the box
container,
next to it in the FedEx truck or whatever.
Like that. Yeah, and so our box was seized as part of like questioning because of this
evidence.
container that was held there. And so I freaked out. I was like, that's one of those moments where it's like, you can problem solve to an extent. And, but this was completely out of my hands. I was like, I don't know the layout or the conversations or the end-to-end process of navigating with like a customs plus federales agent. And luckily our guy Maurizio was able to kind of navigate through that. He was calling like the customs agent and customs people almost every single day to kind of figure out what was happening. It did lead to essentially what was, I believe, almost a 3-week delay. But I kind of accepted that we just lost the prototype at that point, which was such a bummer because it was like, we'd spent all this time and granted, I knew we were going to kind of move past it. We were already kind of looking at the next prototype and how we could, already make it better. But losing that was such a momentum and motivation killer, on the spot. And no one prepares you for, oh, by the way, there's a potential that it's a cartel package. Like, what? Right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and the thing is, like, you can't insure for this, right? You can't tell UPS, this prototype is actually a $30,000 prototype for the timeline delay and the labor it might take me to go rebuild this one off that was hand painted, that was hand built. It's one of one. We got to spool up all the vendors again. Like, UPS is never going to buy that.
Exactly.
Like, no, we crushed a box of plastic and a circuit board in it. Like, here's your $2,000 if it's really that special.
Right.
But that's not what it's worth to the company.
That's exactly it.
Aabesh, that really should have been taken. That really should have been taken into account in your like due diligence deck as like a potential risk that you
Your
run
SWOT
into.
analysis.
Yeah, I
the
really
federales are stealing my
Like
box.
why we keep losing investors that don't want to mess with the cartel. So that's totally fair.
I guess like on the topic of investors, you already mentioned this. Like, you've been on Shark Tank. I feel like for a lot of folks out there, not particularly in the hardware space, I think hardware is actually pretty well spotlighted on the show. I think it's
almost disproportionately to software.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of I think it's almost counterintuitive to the market at large. But nonetheless, like, you actually went through the process. You were on there. Your show has been aired, I think now a couple different times. So I would love to just dive into that experience that you had going through that process, both the application, and I understand there's a long process, in addition to actually going in front of the sharks and going through the whole process.
Yeah, it was a dream come true moment. I think it's disproportionate because of the fact that it's just easier to showcase and show and tell hardware products, period, right? You're trying to show a product that you brought to life. And honestly, I'm all about that. I think more hardware products and CBG products should be kind of, the highlight of the show. I think, honestly, there could be less food type products. I feel like that has definitely been a focus over the last couple of seasons, the last couple of years. I love when I'm seeing other kind of tech, especially IoT products that make it to the tank. It feels like those are far and few in between, depending on their stage. And so when I made it on, like, they were telling me like, hey, like, we really like your product because I think I met the check boxes they were looking for in hardware product, IoT, and gardening was still one of those industries and categories that hadn't seen a lot of love in Shark Tank, I feel, in terms of just like people coming on.
But it is something that is done by a lot of the viewers, right?
Definitely.
Like that is actually the Americana hobby that they were trying to serve.
Exactly. And so there was a lot of potential there, which is why I feel our video applications and all that really stood out. We were reached out to through a referral, got in contact after submitting, the classic Shark Tank application. Like the initial one was pretty straightforward. And then there's like a 30+ page application with like 2 video applications. And we spent so much time on it and eventually made it through. I think our season had, to put it in context of like how much people kind of apply, 60,000+ businesses applied to Shark Tank season 14.
That's crazy.
Or season 15, sorry, the one I was on. And so it's really one of those cases where you just have to treat it as like a lottery ticket that's not guaranteed, even after you go on, which is the craziest thing. We did all this preparation, spent all this time and money, right, on things like the props, the set work, like all of the time and energy that went into kind of perfecting the pitch and all that good stuff. And even up to the weekend, what I can share is that they basically, you have a producing team and all this, and they share that you're not guaranteed anything even after you go on and have a great pitch. So of like the 100+ folks that actually go out and fly out, to LA, Sony television studio lots where, once I flew out, it felt like a kid in a candy shop. Like I was in a little golf cart, all these other kind of giant movie studio lots with Spider-Man moving, filming in one lot here. You have The Boys from Amazon Prime filming in this lot. And it was definitely a Hollywood moment. But despite that, you're still kind of left with this question of, man, there's like a 30% chance still, even if I have a good pitch, that my stuff never makes it to the big screen, right? So it is very much, and I tell everyone that applies to Shark Tank this advice, like treat it as a lottery ticket and a way to own in on your business in the sense of storytelling, right? Like treat it as a big kind of massive investment opportunity that may or may not play out, but do not treat it as your end all be all of like this is the only thing that's going to work for the business, or this is the Hail Mary pass. Like 1 out of 60,000 is like, you're essentially looking at lower chances, 10x lower chances than like a Harvard or Stanford in terms of getting in, right? So, and I'm not saying that to like toot our own horn. Like it was truly, when we were going through it, we were like just anxiously kind of waiting for them to say like, sorry, your thing didn't air, or sorry, you didn't make it. And I had that feeling, that same anxiety, 2 weeks before our airing, until we finally got the official email, from the executives and from the folks saying, hey, congrats, you're going to be airing. Here's your info. So it's very much a kind of mysterious process in the way the production and everything kind of goes. Yep.
I mean, what's amazing is I would have never said this until I heard this journey you went on. This is an accelerator. It may or may not turn out good for you, but it makes you polish your pitch. It makes you get ready. It makes you do this stuff.
Yeah.
You may or may not actually get the investment at the end of the accelerator, but like
that's a good way to
it is a forcing function.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I would have never viewed Shark Tank like that until I heard that journey of like, because the journey would have been worth it even had you not gotten aired, because now you've had to level up your marketing, your pitch, your et cetera, and you had all this content you could use everywhere else. That's so neat.
And so what was like the byproduct of the season be like you officially being on Shark Tank? Like,
are you famous now?
Are you? I mean,
I'm like
I'd imagine.
Yeah, I'm like an F-list celebrity. Is if that's like the tiering structure? I've definitely had a lot of cool moments with, I think specifically Nashville. Like there's been a lot of cool moments with, people coming up to me in person with like my local communities in like the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, the Nashville Chamber of Commerce, or, some of these different outlets where I show up of people kind of coming up and saying how excited they are to kind of see me on the big TV and seeking my advice and this and that. And, I've showed up in a couple of different like news spots before and interviews. And so it's definitely leveled up like our media and PR in that respect. It is one of those things, again, where it's a lottery for a reason. We won big time in the sense of being on air and having a good show. And because of that, we've earned this ability to kind of mention, as seen on Shark Tank, as featured on Shark Tank. People see us as kind of like a Shark Tank company now. And so all of that was definitely game changing for us. We basically doubled in revenue year over year last year. We didn't really kind of skyrocket like a lot of people see after Shark Tank. And I think a big kind of misperception around that is that the people that really take off from Shark Tank, especially with their airings, they're typically the ones that have massive marketing budgets to essentially ride out the wave that comes from the organic lift that is Shark Tank, right? What I mean by that is that we didn't have that budget. We didn't have the big marketing budgets. We barely got in the funding we needed to fund the inventory for the demand that Shark Tank gave us. And even then, we were like 2 to 3 months late because we only had a 2-week notice before our airing. So all of our money went into inventory. We didn't really have the marketing budget to really ride out that wave that you get. And what I mean by riding out that wave is that there is a bit of science of marketing that goes behind, okay, we know we're airing, right? We know we're going to get like this big demand spike for 48 to 72 hours. The people that have the marketing budgets in place immediately hit the ground running and capturing all of that top of funnel traffic through a mix of paid advertising, UGC influencer ads, being able to remarket those visitors, within a month, and then doubling down on as much Shark Tank based marketing content as they can. We're starting to do that. We're finally playing catch up and organically pushing those budgets. But whenever I see people like saying, oh, these guys blew up like to millions of dollars in sales with this, and it's like, oh man, they already had a ton of sales before. They had a ton of fundraising. For a fact they're like pumping all the marketing.
They were sitting on dry powder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They had a lot of dry powder and fuel to kind of pour into to ride that wave. And so we had a bit of that, but it's not like that crazy wave that we were hoping for, like, that was kind of promised to us, or we kind of expected in seeing a lot of these different Shark Tank success stories, right? You kind of have to make your own momentum even after Shark Tank to really make use of it.
Right. Well, and that's just the heart for me of like how competitive the world of sales and business are in general.
Yeah.
Right. And like DeAndre, like this goes to where you and I like join forces to figure this out for Glassboard and for our partners. Like, you can build the best product, but if you don't have the sales and marketing and the go-to-market motions and your ICP nailed down of where you're going to find them and how you're going to get them to learn about your cool thing, whether it's a service or a product or a digital product, you don't have anything. You can be a team full of brilliant engineers. If you can't sell and market, it doesn't work. And sell and market isn't just luck, isn't just skill, isn't just money. It is all three of those that kind of go into a blender together.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, totally. I think that when it comes to like go-to-market, especially for, I think that you do have a very unique angle, though. Like you focus so much on because I think you guys are up to like 250,000 plus users on the mobile application, or more than that.
I think we've crossed 500,000 downloads, at least 350,000 registered users at this point. Yeah, it's the way we've set it up is to make it usable as many people as possible. So you don't need the device to actually use the app. The app is free to use, even without like the subscription, and all that. So it makes it so that anyone can jump on the app coming into the heartbeat, right? As I mentioned, coming into the ecosystem. And then the hardware just becomes like the sticky kind of, intro to the ecosystem as well. But it really levels up anyone. Exactly. It's the sticky hook.
I think that, we have conversations with hardware founders frequently, as you could imagine.
Yeah, you wouldn't imagine.
As this is the Hardtech Podcast, it's like literally what we do. And I think about the best practices when it comes to scaling a hardware company, specifically that also has like the connected piece to it
like
as well.
IoT hardtech business.
An IoT hardtech business. And the community, you've got it. The actual product, you've got it. And then I think like the go to market in addition to that, like with going on Shark Tank, it's a lot of people like try to get there, but it seems to me, especially with that massive audience in terms of like, you basically have curated that go to market. You've built your own channel of these really like interested and like attentive users that then can go buy your product, which then makes it even more sticky. I think that just for like founders out there listening and investors as well, just in terms of like best practices, it's what you've done with Flora is in my opinion like best practices, and I think that people should really look at that.
Yeah,
well, and I think and a bit to dig into that, like you were going on earlier about how that UX UI in the app is your brand ambassador, right? Like that is how you want people to experience Flora the first time.
Yeah.
And the hardware has to follow that. It's a tough act to follow.
Yeah.
And are you seeing that like the software is the world's best loss leader? It's free to push out, but it's effectively a loss leader for you guys, right? And that gets people excited about your brand, what you offer. And the hardware and Hardtech is that sticky hook because it allows them to touch the physical world, not just experience it digitally.
Exactly. No,
right?
It's beautifully put. And I love the flip because typically what you hear is the hardware is the loss leader, right? And I hate that because it's so funny. One of our best investors early on, Bracken Darrell, he was the CEO of Logitech. And now is the CEO of Vans Group, so he's overseeing like Vans, Timberland, North Face, like all. He's an incredible brand builder. He used to work on Gillette, and back in the day, he oversaw all of Gillette, like as part of P&G. And so I brought up like the loss leader of hardware for him. In the sense of like you hear that a lot in terms of strategy of the hardware and software of kind of best practices is what Peloton is doing and pushing this hardware. They're losing a lot of money up front on it, but they're making it up in the subscriptions and the app and the ecosystem. Same thing with like Oura Ring at first and these guys and that. And he laughed and he was like, if there's one thing I could change is like people's perception on the loss leader, because we still made money on every single handle sold. Like, sure, there were the razor blades, but like people are spinning this loss leader aspect in terms of hardware where it's like, if you're unable to figure out like the margins and the first profit order basis of hardware, you're going to have a much harder time trying to figure out the rest of the equation with, the software or the upsells or any of that. And so I say that because I think I had to flip exactly like what you're talking about, the ideology of like, okay, what is going to be our loss leader in that case, right? Because we basically were like, okay, we got to make money on the hardware. It's a sticky hook, but what if the app is kind of the gate, right?
It's the loss leader.
Exactly.
And it's a free one.
Right.
It costs you $0 to run, almost $0 to run and download.
We're asking for attention and time. And when we provide value to offset that attention and time, people start getting hooked. They start realizing like, hey, I can trust this app, this Flora thing that I'm sharing with others, or they might not be ready to kind of jump into the hardware, ready to pay a subscription just yet. But that is the long game, right? It is much harder to kind of convince people to an app over a couple days than it is like the other way around. And so we chose that hard path of let's make the software, free. Let's get people into the door through the software and the community building and the gamification. And then let's see if the hardware acts as an accelerator. And that was a multi-year bet that is finally starting to see dividends and starting to pay off. And it is now a really solid hardware moat, right? As you see, one thing that I'm a huge AI nerd. Like I've been kind of plugged into all, the AI ecosystem updates, even before GPT, like early on, I was the one that came up with Flora's machine learning based, like neural net with identifying, houseplants and data labeling tens of thousands of different houseplant species. So we could have our own kind of custom neural net in identifying different plant species. The one thing I can tell you, with AI is that it's making it easy for anyone to spin up a Plankier app and then push it out in a matter of 48 hours, right? So the barriers to entry in terms of software and making really good apps is going down, like day by day.
So
right?
rapidly.
And yeah.
No, sorry to interrupt you.
Good.
The one thing I was gonna add is like another prime example of a company that is like, so Aura frames, for example. Right. I think they said about either is it 50 or 80%. I think it might be 50.
It's a huge amount of the market.
A huge percent of their sales comes from repeat buyers, but it's not the same client. And it's because these Aura frames, if you've ever seen one, they do about $100 million.
Digital photo frames for those listening.
Oh, interesting.
Digital photo frames. Yeah. And basically what it is, they have a mobile application, which is like their heart. And you have, grandma has the picture frame on her.
I get grandma the picture frame, but you get the app so you can upload photos to your frame, but you never bought a photo frame.
But I never bought a photo frame. And guess who ends up buying a photo frame? I do. Why? Because I'm on the app.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's like, again, so that's kind of what we're speaking to there. It's like you have opportunities that you've built that software moat to sort of move about and try different strategies with that user base to kind of create either those reoccurring buyers or what have you. I think it's just really unique there.
Well, I think the really neat part about what you did is you called the curve on the machine learning part of teaching me how to not kill my plants, right? And now that's table stakes. But you used you being ahead of the curve initially to survive the hardware mode of death. And now you have hardware. And if anyone's ever bought a piece of your hardware, they're not going to leave your ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly it. I think, and that was a tricky dance to figure out, right? Because it's so hard doing hardware for a reason. It's why it's in the name. It's why even like, it's one of those things where even if you have a ton of capital, you can screw it up. And it goes back to that conversation we had of like all those long iterations, all those unknown risks, all those things of trying to control and figure out, how you can minimize like getting punched in the face. And I think what we found is that the reason you don't have a blossoming field of these plant sensors coming out from the likes of giants like Scott's Miracle-Gro or Apple or Google or these guys is that creating a great hardware product that is brand defining and actually lives up to its potential, it takes a long time of iteration, no matter even if you're throwing millions of dollars into it, right? And I think it was that big bet that we had to make in the sense of, do we want to go down this route because it's capital intensive? And the answer to that was yes. And the only reason we were able to survive through that hurdle of death, that valley of death for so many hardware startups, is because of our app. It's because we were able to survive on our community, our subscriptions, what we built around, a model that can sustain itself even without the hardware. But the beauty of thinking across, seeing that curve kind of come up ahead is that now that software curve has been completely flattened or is flattening.
It's played out, yeah.
We're already ready with the hardware. We've done kind of the hard, struggles with hardware in terms of iterations and learning and hard lessons fought and learned, that we feel so confident, even with our competition, of being able to step up with a fraction of the capital, right? That's one of the things is that we've been so bootstrapped through this journey that, I actually, like, when people start out, I tell them that hardware is brutal if you don't have the capital to kind of withstand the shocks and the craziness along the way. And so I think what we did was very unorthodox, it is next to impossible to bootstrap a hardware startup or a business. I do not recommend it for anyone starting out. And there were a lot of things that we got lucky with, Shark Tank being one of them. Obviously, there's effort and applied luck and things you can do to make that process easier. But it was definitely one of those cases where we survived, and now it's helping us survive, now the software kind of flattening and the software reckoning that's happening now. So it's definitely come full circle in both ways through the journey.
No, it's unpacking this theme that I've been internalizing during this talk, that everything you've done is so intentional. Like, I think this is like I could distill down what you've done well from the story you've told here and when you and I talked earlier is you started out building a hardware product as a toy, not a product, building a hardware hobby Arduino kit as a toy because you wanted to solve your own problem. Yeah. That snowballed out of control. Now I'm building an app and I know how to do that. I know software. I know how to develop software and software products. I'm going to do this right. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be intentional about this thing. And it's going to look good. It's going to feel good. It's going to work good. And that probably bled into how you developed your hardware with the partners you joined. You might have been Bambi in the field, not knowing how hardware happens, but you were very intentional about what you wanted the expectations of the outcome. Mm-hmm. Like just drilling that down. And with us in Glassboard and anything else working on hardware, that makes it so much less likely to go completely off the rails. If you have conviction and intentions about what you want to build and the quality you want to hold and what you're willing to bend on and what you're not, man, it makes the engineers behind you so their job's easy, 100%. Right? We might still have to iterate, have to fumble and drive by Braille to find what you really like, mm-hmm. but at least you're very clear on intentions on what it has to do and what your users need it to do. And you have a design language and a quality in your app that they can kind of mirror. Yep. And that had to drive you to where you're at today. And I would put money that in your next hardware iterations in the future, they happen on more on the Rails timelines. They are way more bigger reaches. Yeah. Right? You've now learned how to play this dance because you were an expert at this in software. Now you're getting to be an expert at this in hardtech. And that intentionality is going to drive you to such good outcomes. I think that's why you have users in your app. Everything feels like it's there for a purpose. Oh, it's really well said, and I really appreciate that. I think it comes down to one thing you kept repeating, which is language, right? Being able to speak that design mm-hmm. language, being able to speak that language of iteration. And I think the biggest thing that helped me early on was learning that language by
literally applying it myself with prototyping and having to learn how to code and having to learn how to, like, I barely knew C++ to be able to, write the code for my first Arduino kit, project in terms of literally what do I have to set this LED light to glow blue, right? And then
like how do I hello world a blue LED that flashes?
Exactly. And so like that's learning a language though. It's very similar in that I had to learn the words for the simple if then logic of turning on this LED switch, of learning how to program, a reset switch for my breadboard, or I was learning how to push out my first like test flight like app in the sense of learning how to program through Swift and Xcode. And so you start learning the language, and what that allows you to do is speak that language with your engineers, and it not only earns you this sort of respect of, okay, shoot, like this guy knows what he's talking about, but it's more
he's got
so
street cred.
Right, street cred is definitely there. Highly recommend it. But it's exactly like what you said. Learning that language smooths the rails to where you're able to move quicker, move faster. You know exactly what you want to avoid in terms of your initial specs. You know exactly what you want. And the more language you have to kind of define that, the easier it becomes for the engineers, because, what we've seen in both software and hardware, no matter what, you're kind of dreaming up, it's basically the same process, right? You want this thing, whether it's an app or a product, you come up with the right people around it, then you figure out the proposal and the specs to kind of get that to, step one, which is the prototype. And the thing is, even in that first step, there's this game of kind of telephone, right? Where you're saying one thing to one person, that person then says another thing to another, and then the language is lost or kind of like diluted or misinterpreted along the way. That gets less and less so when you speak the language yourself and learn the language yourself. And I think we were in a very unique spot, and I challenged myself to be in that very unique spot of learning that lingo, because you'll find that a lot, at least in my opinion, a lot of CEOs and founders that really miss the mark end up being the ones that are too gung-ho about one aspect of the business, which is like maybe fundraising, or maybe they're doing a bunch of marketing, but they're getting more and more removed from speaking the language of the customers, or maybe, it's a hardware founder giving all of their trust to an outside agency or a contractor or, someone that they're working with
to market this thing,
to market it, to build it, to whatever. And they realize that they have to learn the language along the way, and they feel like they're getting, maybe scammed or taken for a ride. And it's like, well, it's almost the same for me as like going to a foreign country, not knowing the language and feeling like you're just constantly anxious on your feet the whole time. It's like you can do the prep to speak some of the language. And I think that same kind of belief I hold for other founders and for other folks that are kind of joining, starting on that journey. I think the best products start with a really fundamental understanding of like, hey, like we can build at least a crappy prototype version of this ourselves, so we know some of the language. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's so awesome. And again, I think it's so cool that tools like Arduino, tools like 3D printers exist to allow someone who wasn't a Hardtech native to feel comfortable enough to jump in the deep end. Right? Like,
exactly.
I haven't written a line of software since my senior year in college. I've had Drew here at CTO at Glassboard to fix all of my software sins for me ever since. But I have no doubt that if I got the itch to go start a SaaS company because I found a problem that I was passionate that needed to be solved, I could go home, go on the internet, and teach myself how to write enough code to make a crappy prototype and get it there. And that's been the case for 20 years, right? Like for actually 20 or 25 years, you could launch a software product beta from your house because the internet existed to teach you how to do it.
Yep.
That hasn't existed in hardware until the last 10, right? Like half the time. And it's just now catching up and getting to be more mainstream. Like Arduinos are more mainstream than they've ever been. People like Particle, people like Blink are doing IoT platform literally out of the box. You can buy a dev kit and on their hardware, right in their software IDE environment, as long as you put it in a 3D printed box and it measures some sensor you connect it to it, you've made an IoT device.
Yeah.
And you're on their back end, you're on their front end, you're on their hard tech. Like, you can now launch these products with so little risk that you can MVP things and start pushing on bruises. Am I solving this problem? Can grandma use this? Can my mom use this? Like, do they like it? Would they buy this for dad for Father's Day? Right? Like, you can go flight this stuff without hiring a firm.
That's
right?
exactly
With just enough grit.
And it's becoming easier and easier. And I think that is the true beauty for me with like the AI proliferation over the last couple of years is that speed to learning and speed of curiosity is like, it's insane, right? Like if you use it as a tool to accelerate the learning of that language, whether it's hardware or software, you let's say jumping back into something that you want to build that solves a pain point for someone that you love, like the ability for AI to teach you those steps along the way instead of just plugging and playing is like the thing that does it all for you. It smooths that curve of you learning by like 10x. And I think if I had AI to like assist and help like back in the day, it would have made those first couple of months so much quicker in terms of the uptake. And I think that's how a lot of people are cleverly using it these days to kind of use it as a curiosity acceleration tool, if anything. So to your point, I think it's easier now than ever before.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on that. That AI is the best thing to ask you questions. What should I be asking? How should I be looking at this? I'm not going to ask you the right stuff. AI, I'm trying to learn about this topic. What questions should I ask myself?
Yeah, that's a great way to put
but
it.
Again, that's parallel for all of us technical people. DeAndre, your world's gotten easier too in go-to-market because of AI.
I mean, it's the same exact concept. It's just on the side of like go to market and sales and marketing as a whole. It's what questions am I not asking, or if I'm looking to deploy a new go to market channel in X field for Y ICP, what are the kind of questions that I should be asking? And you probably thought of 1 through 7, but you didn't think through 7 through 10 or 8 through 10. And you're like, okay, those are actually really, really good ones. Maybe 1 and 2 you kind of ruled out anyways, but you end up with like 3 or 4 really, really good ones that with like 1 or 2 that you didn't think of previously, and that actually leads to success and learnings that you didn't have to go and learn. It just kind of accelerated that process, and now you're immediately deploying a channel or a motion or an action that actually bears a desired result you're looking for. So I find that like it's of course AI is helping across the spectrum. As we wrap up the show, I'm just curious, like, what is the future of Flora? And, I don't know if we mentioned at the beginning of the show, like you've been on CNN and talking about tariffs. And, I think you mentioned before that you're getting this, a big batch in of an order as well. And we've talked about, the future of the hardware, the future of the software, and the moat that you've already built. What is kind of like the next few months, maybe years, look like for you in terms of growth for Flora?
So I'd like to think we have a really crystal clear idea of that. And, if there's anything I've learned from the last 4 years, it's just like, expect nothing, like this whole thing with like CNN and Shark Tank and this is like beyond my wildest dreams. Like, let me just say, so grateful for those crazy opportunities. You never know what's going to happen. But, short-term goals is really become like a startup of the year essentially in Nashville and keep doubling and tripling in our home base here. Build out a beautiful team in person. I think it's something that we've been kind of missing in these last couple of years because we've been fully global remote as a company since inception. Like we've had people from all over, from Atlanta to the UK to Ukraine, working like on our projects and working on Flora. And so I think we're starting to kind of lay down our roots here, in Nashville, all puns intended. The long-term vision is become the nest for gardening and houseplants. Become basically this company that merges IoT and everything we've done with the merging of hardware and software to make it as easy and fun as possible for people to become plant parents.
That's incredible.
Everybody, this is the Hardtech Podcast. I'm your host, DeAndre Harakas, my co-host, Grant Chapman. And Aabesh, thank you so much for joining us, man.